All right, so with this one here, again, you look at the paper, obviously a little lengthy, but it's kind of just setting the tone, kind of how before we start looking at the actual films, how does film change or how is film revolutionized here in the United States? Okay, so just going through, like I said, we'll get as far as we can today, and we'll go from there. Okay, so maybe. There we go. All right, so when we look at film, one of the first people to kind of step in and be that impactful guy is Thomas Edison. Okay, so they should go fill out that Thomas Edison section based on the slide there. So Edison, 1893, starts developing the first kind of styles and the first kind of methods to try to get motion picture. Again, you had still pictures and everything else, with the idea of having the ability to create pictures in motion and getting life-size images out there instead of just that snapshot. Okay, so he tried to monopolize the industry, and his thought was, if I can control the entire film industry, I'm going to make a buku of bucks down the road. Right, but you look there, he starts performing in New York City, or trying to not perform, but endorse his inventions in New York City. Again, does he have complete success? No, but he starts kind of setting that tone. All of a sudden, we get a case where Olivia's in New York City and she sees what Edison's doing. She goes, you know what, I'm gonna go home and try to do the same thing. So now you got many people, trying to push things in the movie industry. Okay. So Edison's doing this, 1893. By 1896, you start seeing the first film start to emerge. Okay, so motion pictures kind of became a novelty. It was something that was a rare thing that you didn't have to have, which still today, but you would save up for weeks or months just to be able to go see a movie. Okay, so you look there, the first 10 years, they're a short subject. Most films 8 to 10 minutes long. And a lot of times silent. A lot of times, if you're trying to watch a silent film, if you've never watched a silent film, or if you've never watched one, put yourself through that misery for about 20 minutes, and then you probably won't finish the film. But very difficult to kind of follow along with. But again, if you're an actor, you got about $8 to act on screen and do the business there. So very short, very sweet. But your first films you're going to see late 1800s. All right, so one of the first major films we see is the Great Train Robbery. The Great Train Robbery came out in 1903. Right, and again, that was the first real storyline. First time really you had a film that people could look at and say, okay, I kind of understand it. Right? And as people watched this film and they started saying, okay, I can understand what this film is about, all of a sudden it started opening up people's interest. What can I do? How can we make the next great movie based off of what we see in this Great Train Robbery? And so Great Train Robbery at that time was probably viewed as the greatest movie in American history. So you can give your opinion on how great it was. Come on, you better open.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Push ahead a little bit. Of course. All right, we may not make it very far with this one here, but one, a great train robbery has a theme. Obviously, imagine that it's about somebody robbing a train. But even though it's silent, people could actually watch it and kind of understand what in the heck was going on, what it was about. So that made it like the greatest thing since sliced bread. Only negative is, again, you're watching a minute or so of it, but trying to watch a whole film in silence, we would probably struggle with that today. Okay, but I said that was viewed as like the great movie of the time, the first revolutionary movie that we see. Okay, so as we start getting movies in the early 1900s, it's also the time period where we start seeing more and more people coming to America, that whole period of immigration and everything. So as more people came to America, well, all of a sudden, as more people who wanted to go watch movies. Okay, so the movies became kind of a big thing, a big ordeal. Admission was very cheap, so as they started producing more and more of these, you had very cheap productions. Seating was democratic, right? So you kind of could go in. It wasn't like if somebody was wealthier than you, they got to sit in a certain spot, sit wherever you want. They had them throughout the day, so you could go at different points. Again, these are things we think of as normal today. But back then, it was like, holy cow, look at this, check this out. I can go at any point in the day and watch this movie. Okay, so it was something new. Even though they didn't have dialogue, they didn't have speaking, it still brought that opportunity to people. Okay, so one of the things as we started seeing movies develop was this idea of what we call Nickelodeons. Okay, Nickelodeon, you look at it originally about 5 cent admission. Okay, but these were kind of little stations or whatever you go through, and basically you put your 5 cents through, and you basically watch a little short film, and you leave and you go back to work or whatever it may be. You think about back then, a small 7 or 8 minute film, well, heck, you can go watch that during your lunch break. Okay, so people were able to do that there. They were able to take these Nickelodeons outside of the city. Okay, so rural areas now, people living in the country could view movies and things as well. So Nickelodeons kind of became the first, if you will, movie theater. But most Nickelodeons were small little rooms, 2 or 3 people might view it and then leave. Immigrants versus progressive reforms. Movies started showing kind of the values of immigrants. A lot of immigrants coming to America. We didn't really know their value. We didn't know some of the things they did and stuff like that. So, kind of showed some of the values there, sometimes good, sometimes bad there, but it kind of showed how immigrants' life, how immigrants valued different things, but again, some positive, some negative. It also, kind of turned people to leisure activities, kind of showcase things that, hey, people in the city aren't just poor. There are other issues going on, brothels, public health, and those type of things. So it also allowed you to kind of show people through a small film what some of the problems in society were. Okay, so you start seeing immigrants, progressives, different groups being portrayed in the movie, just to kind of explain themselves, if you will. Okay, so we get to 1905, a couple of years after the Great Train Robbery, and all of a sudden you start seeing films that really make progress because now they're hitting the 10-minute mark. Okay, so 10-minute films, all of a sudden sexual relationships, and we're talking about here, just the idea of a husband and wife holding hands in a film and things like that. Economic inequality, so showing, within the film, obviously the difference between people, the wealthy and whatnot. You start seeing more violence. You get compared to today is nothing, but back then what was looked at as violence during that time period. So you start seeing small evolutions, but again, these are only 10-minute films. Okay, so it's not like you're going to show or do a ton during that 10-minute film. Okay, so the Motion Picture Patent Company, right, developed in 1909. This was Thomas Edison. We talked about him wanting to monopolize. He tries it again. So here we are 15 years later. He failed in 93. He's going to try it again and try to monopolize things. Okay, he basically wanted to have complete power, complete control over the entire film industry. And again, once again, he tries to basically control all the companies, and he fails again. This is the time in America where we were trying to eliminate monopolies. So probably not a very good idea to try to form a monopoly at that point in time. Okay, but Edison doing all he can because he wanted all the money he could get. Excuse me. Okay, so as Edison's trying to start and do things with, creating a monopoly in the film industry, you have independents starting to produce their own films. Okay, some of these films start getting a little bit longer in length. Some of them start getting to the point where they use new techniques. They have artists and stuff. All of a sudden, hey, I seen this actor in another film. Actors start to become a little more relevant with things. And then you also start seeing kind of a rating system develop there. And so we look at that idea of, independent films and those things. One of the first ones was Birth of a Nation, okay, by D.W. Griffith. Again, basically dealing with issues with the Ku Klux Klan and things that are happening within the United States, kind of showing that perspective that many people didn't see. And so this short one with it. So even though you don't get necessarily the talking aspect, you see a little bit different in the fact that you're at least getting some type of volume. Okay, so obviously a little bit different than what we've seen with the Great Train Robbery. So again, you see just a little bit there, kind of what they're discussing, what they're talking about. Okay, so we get into the war aspect. Right? So with World War I, we start seeing more and more movies and things like that based on war and conflict. Okay, so we look at the idea that you're getting into newer movies and things like that are happening, that are going on. You're getting to that point where controversial topics start to open up. Different things going on. So as we get into war, people kind of talking about various issues, various things that are going on. So we kind of see a change in the movies. Okay, so 1920s hit, and in the 1920s, you start getting different companies, you look at some of those, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox, MGM, those are all companies we still see today. Okay, so this is kind of that golden age where these movie companies that we still see start to evolve. You see their movie attendance goes up about 50 million people. About half the people in America we're going to see a movie every week. Okay, so that's a pretty high number, getting half of the American population to go in and see various movies there. Okay, so you look at the 1920s, 1940s, you also had some of the more popular movies and films from a historical perspective come out. Were they about history? No, not necessarily, but they're coming from that era, that time period. Okay, so we look at a few of the. We're not going to look at the whole clip here, but just moments.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct, but it's word.
I know what I'm gonna do tomorrow and the next day and next year and the year after that. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet and I'm gonna see the world.
You're taking the house down.
Oh, that's not wrong. I was trying to up there with me. You remember me, George Bailey?
So again, the kid kind of becomes one of those first ones we start seeing a lot of, speaking and volume start to appear. And we look at a couple of these other ones here. I can't read that far away from the screen. I think this is Steamboat Willie. Maybe. Okay, so this becomes one of the first animated movies that we see in history. Okay, so we get first sound, we get first animation. The other two, I'm not going to play. We actually saw those in American history. I know you probably don't remember, but biggest thing, Gone with the Wind, and some of those. Now all of a sudden, you start seeing color implemented into some of the films. So in that 20-year span, you get all these big major companies. You get sound, you get color, and you get animation. Right? So that's kind of why they call it the golden age there. Okay, so that next one there, look at the idea of Hollywood. Okay, Hollywood emerges during this time period because when you're filming during that time, you need a lot of light and things like that. And Hollywood was looked at to have sunshine year round. Okay, so that's why Hollywood kind of became what it is today. All your producers, directors, as they discovered sunshine year round, started moving out there. So became one of those, if you wanted to be in movies and everything, well, you had to live in Hollywood. Okay, so that's where that perception kind of takes place there with people wanting to take that next step moving forward. So you're looking again, 1920s, 1930s. Okay, the Hays Code, another issue we see with movies there, basically started to look at and try to, show the issues, basically say, hey, there's cultural things that we're showing in movies that we shouldn't. So they start to try to ban and censor movies. They basically try to clean movies. you think about today, the Hays Code would be like trying to create a edited version of every film that we see out there. Okay, so that's kind of what they were going to do. They were kind of the first rating system. Think about today, we have PG-13 and rated R. The Hays Code was the first time we tried to create a system like that. Okay, then we go to the Great Depression. Movie theaters basically tried to stay open during the Great Depression. They thought that they would never fail. And again, they had better luck than other places, but you see their revenue fell by about 40%, which if I own a business and my revenue falls by 40%, it's going to be tough to stay open. But on the same token, during the Great Depression, if you could keep 60% of your income, you were doing pretty daggone good. So movie theaters still did better than most other places. They tried to do things to help with attendance, so they would lower the admission. And again, some people during the Depression, it was worth saving 10 cents to go to a movie once a month, right, just to escape. They did double bills, which basically a double feature, pay a dime and get to see two movies. They would give away free dishes. And we're not talking about here's a free plate or a cup. We're talking about free meals. So, if you want, pay 10 cents to come watch this movie, not only will you get to watch the movie, but we'll give you a meal. And for some people, that was maybe the only meal they got that day. Right? And then they'd also give cash prizes to try to get people to come in. I pay a dime, I could win $3. Well, heck, that might, who knows what that's going to do for my family. Okay, so why did Americans go during the Great Depression and trying to escape all the troubles and everything else? If I can go, for an hour to the movie, well, that's an hour I'm not thinking about my bills or being homeless or whatever it may be. You also look at the fact that you started seeing some of the things, talk about gangs and organized crime and, crooked politicians, those type of things started appearing in movies. So people could look at it and say, hey, I understand that. I can relate to that. I see it happen all the time. So you start seeing more movies kind of adapting to real life. All right, then we move to World War II. Okay, as World War II starts to occur, you start seeing more threats within the movie industry, people being targeted, arrested for various things. You see there Jewish studio executives condemned people basically because of what was going on with Hitler and things. You had some people had this perception that, Jews were not equivalent. Some people saying they would not work for Jewish movie producers. There were no movies until Pearl Harbor about support America, support the war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, you start seeing more movies designed to get you to support the war. Okay, so more of those war-related movies. Okay, so during World War II, best contribution, morale. Again, you could go watch a movie about how great America was or how great we were doing in the war, kind of give you that national pride and things like that. You could watch a movie about combat, so seeing kind of an idea of what the soldiers were doing, what they were sacrificing to be there. Okay, so and again, you had Hollywood actors there, you had different things going on. So the movie industry was kind of trying to show your average Joe, hey, this is what things are like, in the war over in Europe. All right, so as good as that was, you also got censorship evolving. Okay, so you had the Bureau of Motion Pictures and the Bureau of Censorship basically kind of monitoring what was being put into movies, what was being done. So again, if there were things, showing the Nazis or the Japanese, you better show it to where they're made out to be the bad guys. Okay, if there's things about, Japan and the Nazis that make them look okay, that movie was going to be censored and that movie was not going to be showed. So you're going to show things that support the war. You're going to show things that make us look like the good guy and make them look like the bad guy no matter what. Okay, manual for motion pictures. Okay, so basically this came out during this time period, during the war. Basically said if you're going to make a film, you had to look at these questions. Is that film going to help us win the war? Is that going to promote a positive outlook on the war? Okay, are people going to be shown making sacrifices for the war? Okay, so think about we told people to buy bonds, we told people to grow gardens and things like that. Show movies that show people doing that. Right? And then how does the film depict the war? How does it make us look? Obviously, we want films that make us look very good in war. So, again, we basically start telling people this is what we want you to produce during the war. Okay, after the war, you look at Hollywood. People started going to the movies less after World War II because people wanted to stay home. They didn't want to go out and about. Radio emerged more and more. So instead of going and paying to go to the movie, I'm going to listen to something on the radio. TV starts to emerge. So I'm going to stay home and watch something on TV rather than go, watch a movie. Okay, so, that changes. A generation changes. So, now all of a sudden after World War II, Hollywood kind of has a new challenge on its hand there. Okay, so after that, we get Hollywood and Congress. Okay, this is all during that whole Red Scare, the fear of communism. So we create the HUAC, or the House Un-American Activity Committee, basically trying to charge people who are bringing communist ties. If you're thought to be a communist or whatever, you could be blacklisted. You could essentially be kicked out of Hollywood and never allowed to come back. Okay, so now all of a sudden we're targeting people in the movies to make sure that things are being followed, that things are being done in a correct manner. Again, trying to tie politics to Hollywood again. Okay, so HUAC's impact discouraged Hollywood from producing controversial films. So I don't want to produce a controversial film because I might get blacklisted, kicked out of Hollywood. Started forcing people to make anti-communist films. So if I talk positive about communism, I'm going to get blacklisted. So I'm going to make movies about how communism is evil. Okay, so we start seeing all these anti-communist movies start to appear very, very quickly. All right, so that's in the 1950s, communism, Red Scare after the war. We jump to the 1960s. Right? 80% of the people going to the movies by 1960 were between 16 and 25. So now all of a sudden I'm pulling in a new generation. And as younger people start going to the movies, now all of a sudden I see cheap horror movies, beach movies, motorcycle movies, things that are going to interest young kids. Okay, young kids aren't necessarily going to be interested in anti-communist or war movies. Okay, so let's make movies to bring in kids. You see some of the originals that are produced back then, the movie Patton in the 1960s, the television show in the late 60s, MASH, starts to emerge kind of about the Vietnam era, and the original Godfather comes out during that time period. So some popular films start to emerge. Okay, then we get to the 70s and 80s. Okay, you start seeing some of your bigger films start to emerge late 70s, early 80s. Star Wars is going to start then. Your Superman movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark are going to go there. And you start seeing a shift in the type of movies. Your inspirational movies, your feel-good stories, your sports movies. You start to see comedies emerge. So, you start to see more of that emergence of what we would think of as, is Hollywood today. Okay, so you start to see that change start to happen. And this is also the first time we start seeing movies about the Vietnam War. Okay, up until that point, you kind of tried to avoid that. Okay, then we get to Hollywood more today, 90s and 2000s. We get rid of the production codes and guidelines. So all of a sudden you start seeing more, Hollywood films with violence, sexual activities and things like that start to appear more and more. You start to see more, profanity on screen and things like that appearing as well. And you look at that change. I can remember, being high school, middle school in the, early mid 90s, and you didn't see hardly any movies with language or, any of that kind of stuff. And you look at today, kids are seeing those type of movies in elementary school. So, you see a huge change in the way Hollywood has done things. And then, of course, today we have our film rating system we didn't have back then. All right. The other thing we look at, and this isn't on your slide or anything, but we also talk about the evolution of film and how film has changed over the years. All right. So here's one example of kind of how film has changed over the years in America.
We're going to make men out of every one of you.
Come on.
The whole world is paying to see this. No change will ever hold that. We'll give them more
This
than
is
things.
Trailer or scene from the original King Kong.
We're millionaires, boys. I'll share it with all of you. Why don't you want to be up the lights on Broadway? Kong, the eighth wonder of the world. All right. Public wants a girl. This time I'm going to get what they want. I don't know why you want to get it. Girl.
I wish you wouldn't keep talking on that.
You want to find that out on the memory chart? Here's what the island looks like. Skull Mountain, the wall, everything just like on my funny little map. Down for that turkey! I'm going out to take the greatest picture in the world. Hear that? They're saying, come, come. Look at that. Torches going through the village. And one. Cover up, man. We're going over the time.
Okay, so we kind of see that remake, aspect. So you get the original King Kong, and then we get the modern day King Kong. Maybe again.
Lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty. Beauty stayed him. thought to exist.
Wall! With the wall ahead!
That's where I'll shoot my picture. Of course it's deserted. This is a ruin.
Take you there! Find them! On the wall!
Saw something. I took her down.
If you haven't found her in 24 hours, there'll be nothing left to find.
All right, so obviously we see a big difference between the original and the remake. And that's as we see, especially more and more in Hollywood, we see that more and more often where we're remaking movies and things today. Okay, so what your assignment's going to be, and probably won't have time today, by the time I get done here, but this will basically, you'll just need to have it turned in by the time you get here on Monday. So you got tomorrow, you got through the weekend, whatever. And then, of course, those that I have tomorrow, I'll have through Tuesday. But movie remake analysis. So you're going to choose a movie that has been remade. And if you just Google movies that have been remade, whatever, if you don't know one, they'll pop up. All right. So this movie remake analysis is on your classroom page. So what you're going to do, the directions are on here. Search for a movie that's been recreated. So I just showed you King Kong, and that's what I'm going to use in the example. So you'll need the name of the movie, the year it produced, the link, and key actors. Okay, so that's the first part. So you look there. I put the original King Kong. There's the trailer. Okay, don't put the YouTube link. Put the actual video. There's when it was released, 1933. And then I put 3 or 4 major actors. Okay, so that's the first thing you're going to do. Then I went to the remake of King Kong, 2005, and I told people who was in that. All right, and then the second part of that, if I go back to the direction page, after you viewed the trailers, write a 1-paragraph response discussing what differences you see between the original movie and the remake. Not necessarily the differences that we see between the actors and the theme, but more the visual, more the quality aspect. So, obviously, if I'm going to do that with, King Kong, I would probably talk about the fact that, one, the computer, the animation is much better than the second one. The first one's black and white. The second one's in color. I would just talk about some of the major differences I see between the two. Okay, and again, just a short paragraph. All right, does that make sense? Okay, so when you open that up, your document is going to look exactly like this. Okay, so all you need to do is, change what I have. So whatever movie you're doing, if you're going to do, I don't care what, just change what I have and put your stuff in there. So you can just edit my template there. All right. So any questions on that? You just have to have that by Monday. Okay, so we'll wrap that up and then we'll start jumping into the movie aspect next week here. All right, so with that, got a little bit of time before the bell rings.